Hello and welcome to Finding Sides Using Trigonometry. The first one, it says, set up an equation that involves x, 10, and 20 using sine, cosine, or tangent. So one of the things that you want to do is make sure you realize that we're using SOHCAHTOA trig ratios in every one of these. The angle measure that I have is 20 degrees. The x is definitely the opposite side, and the 10 is definitely the adjacent side. So I ask myself, which of these trig functions, sine, cosine, or tangent, all deal with opposite over adjacent? And it's definitely the tangent function. So you want to choose the tangent function, and I'm going to write tangent of theta equals opposite over adjacent. The tangent, I'm going to replace that theta with 20 degrees equals the opposite, which is x, over the adjacent, which is 10. So notice that everything is just falling into place. I wind up replacing the theta with the 20 degrees. I wind up replacing the opposite with the x, and I wind up replacing the adjacent with the 10. And it's very important that you realize that we're always taking sine, cosine, or tangent of an angle measure. Then the next step right here, it says cross multiply. So I'm going to put tangent of 20 over 1. I cross multiply and I get x equals 10 tangent of 20. And then it says solve for the missing side. So I'm going to wind up typing into my calculator 10 tangent of 20. And I get x is equal to 3.6397023343. And for now, we'll just round to the nearest tenth. So x is equal to 3.6. So the steps are to pick an equation or a trig function that allows you to use the pieces of information that you have, cross multiply, and then solve for the missing side. So let's take a look at the next one. So it says an 8-foot ladder is... An 8-foot rope is tied from the top of a pole to a stake in the ground as shown in the diagram below. If the rope forms a 57-degree angle with the ground, what is the height of the pole? So the height of the pole is definitely this part. So that's going to be my x. And then I pretend that I'm standing at the 57. The x is definitely the opposite side. And the rope in this case is definitely my hypotenuse. So out of SOHCAHTOA, you ask yourself which trig function deals with the opposite and the hypotenuse. The tangent is opposite over adjacent, the cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and the sine is definitely the opposite over the hypotenuse. So I'm going to get rid of the cosine and the tangent because I don't need those at all. And now I'm going to do sine of 57 equals the opposite, which is going to be x, over the hypotenuse, which is going to be 8. The nice part about this one is I just cross multiply, and I got x equals 8 sine 57. You need to make sure you type that into your calculator. So 8 sine 57 is equal to, in this case, 6.70936, and it goes on. And then rounded to the nearest tenth would be x is equal to 6.7 feet. Okay, the next question here, it says, as shown in the diagram, a ladder 5 feet long leans against a wall and makes an angle of 65 degrees. So that angle measure is 65 degrees. And then it says, find the nearest tenth of a foot, the distance from the wall to the base of the ladder. It's very important that you read that part. Find the distance from the wall to the base of the ladder. Now, you might want to put your x here, but it definitely doesn't go there. That's the height of the building. Your x is supposed to go over here. So this is definitely the distance from the wall to the base of the ladder. Now, this is the hypotenuse, and this is the adjacent. So I'm going to wind up using which trig function out of SOHCAHTOA that deals with the adjacent and the hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, so that's no good. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so that's no good. and I'm going to actually use the cosine. So it's going to be the cosine of 65 equals the adjacent, which in this case is x, over the hypotenuse, which in this case is 5. So the next step that I do is I cross multiply, and I write x equals 5 cosine of 65, and then I type it into the calculator, 5 cosine of 65, and I wind up with x is equal to 2.1130911309, and then it says to the nearest tenth of a foot, so x is equal to 2.1 feet. Okay, now we're going to go on to the next page. So it says a right triangle contains a 38-degree angle. A right triangle contains a 38-degree angle whose adjacent side measures 10. So I'm going to put the 10 right there. And then it says, what is the length of the hypotenuse to the nearest hundredth of a centimeter? So in this case, I'm going to be standing at the 38. The x is definitely the hypotenuse, and the 10 is definitely my adjacent. So I'm out of the 3 trig functions, SOHCAHTOA, I'm probably not going to use sine because it's opposite over hypotenuse. And I'm definitely not going to use tangent because it's opposite over adjacent. In this case, I'm going to use cosine again because it's adjacent over hypotenuse. Cosine of 38. Cosine of 38 equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Now, this one's a little trickier because when I cross multiply, I don't automatically have my answer, like the last 2 examples. X times cosine of 38 equals 10. And then to solve for x, you actually literally divide by the cosine of 38. Divide by the cosine of 38. So in your calculator, make sure you use the alpha y equals button and press alpha y equals enter, and then 10 down cosine of 38, and then enter. And you'll wind up with x is equal to 12.69018215. So to the nearest hundredth of a centimeter, x is going to be equal to 12.69 centimeters. Now this question is slightly different because we have 2 steps here. Once I cross multiply, I then have to divide by the cosine of 38. It's important that you treat this cosine of 38 as though it was an ugly decimal, and then you'll be able to solve correctly. Thanks, and I'll see you tomorrow.